From clause. In this video I will show you the structure of from clause, how it looks like and how to use, to write a LINQ query. I already mentioned in a previous video, that we can use this clause only in query syntax or in mixed syntax. So, we cannot use this clause in method syntax. Let's start. The from clause in LINQ is used to specify the data source that you want to query. You can use it to query a variety of data types, including arrays, lists, data tables, strings, XML files, and dictionaries. A query expression must begin with from clause. Also inside a query expression we could have subqueries. For these subqueries we have to use from clause at the beginning. The structure of it is the following. From, range variable, in, data source. It consists of two main parts, the range variable and the data source. Let's understand, what does each part mean and how to set. I will start with the data source. As mentioned, we can use from to query any data source, that must be of type, 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁, 𝗖𝗵𝗪 or equeryable of t. The data source could be an array, a list, a data table, files from a folder, a dictionary, or many other sources. We can write the data source in three different ways. Either we write the data directly here, for example the following string array. Or we could have the data in a variable. In this case we can use the variable, like this one. Or using an expression, for example the following string variable with the function split. The output of this expression is a string array. It means, I used an expression that returns a value, which must be of type 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗁 of t or equeryable of t. In summary, we can set the data source in three different ways. Either as a variable, or as a sequence of data, or as an expression, which returns data. Let's now move on to the next part, range variable. This variable represents the items inside the data source. For example, if the data source is an array, this variable represents each item inside the array. If the data source is a data table, this variable represents each row inside the table, or it could represent each column inside the table. And so on, the variable represents the elements inside the data source. So, the range variable is like an iteration variable in a for each statement. You can use any name you want for this variable, for example, x, name, row, file, element, item, etc. The type of this variable will be exact the same as what we have in the data source. For example, if we have a string array, the variable will be of type string. If we have a list of integer, the variable will be of type integer. If we have a data table and we want to loop the rows, the variable will be of type data row, and so on. So, now we know the structure of from clause, and what does each part mean. Let's now see some examples, how to use this clause for different data sources. I will start with arrays. For example the following variable of type string array, that contains the following names. To use from clause for this array, we can write it in this way. I will replace the range variable with the following name for example. And instead of the data source I will set the array variable. The statement is ready now and means the following. The string array is now of type 𝗖𝗵𝗪𝗁. This means, the clause converts the data source into 𝗖𝗵𝗪 type, which we can iterate later in the query. This statement acts like for each loop, for example this one. In each iteration of the query, the variable item represents an item from the array. For example, in the first iteration it represents the first name inside the array. In the second iteration, it represents the second name inside the array, and so on. This statement will be executed, until all items inside the array are iterated. This is also how does this clause work. Let's see the following query, where I use the same statement with other clauses. It's okay if you don't understand the query now, but I only want to show you how a query looks like using this clause. I used from at the beginning of the query. After that I have two clauses, where and select. Where is to filter the data source, and select is to select something from the data source. As you see, I use the range variable in both clauses, so that I can query the data source. This query is to filter the array and get only the names, which start with the letter M. The output of this query will be of type 𝗖𝗵𝗪𝗁, which contains the following items. We can write this query either inside assign activity, or inside invoke code activity. This is how to use from clause to write a LINQ query for arrays. Let's do the same for a list. For example, the following list of integer, which contains the following numbers. I will use exact the same statement, what I used for the array. The statement is ready and the type now is 𝗖𝗔 of integer. This means, the variable item is now of type integer. Let's see the following query, where I am filtering the list to get only the numbers, which are greater than 3. The output will be here of type 𝗖𝗔 of integer, which contains the following numbers, that are greater than 3. This is how to use from clause for a list. Let's now move on to another data type, for example DataTable. I have the variable of DataTable. Tables have columns and rows. So, we can either write a query for the rows, or a query for the columns, or for both together, depending on our business case. Let's start with the columns. I will set again the same statement. As mentioned, I want to query the columns, therefore I have to define that in the data source. It will be as following. The DataTable variable with the property columns. In this way I am getting all columns from the table. But we still need to add cast method, to get the columns as data column type. In this case, the data source will be of type 𝗖𝗔 of data column. But if we don't use cast method, the type will be 𝗖𝗔 of object. What does this method exactly mean and how to use? I will explain it in another video later. For now you only have to write this method as following, if you want to query the columns of a table. The statement is ready now. The range variable is now of type data column. This means, we can use this variable with all properties and methods of a data column type. For example, the following query to get only the columns, that have the letter A in their name. The output of this query will be of type 𝗖𝗔 of data column. This is how to query columns of a data table. Let's now see how to query the rows of the table. For that I can use the same statement, but I have only to change the range variable name to row, so that the name will suit better and we know that we are querying rows. But as mentioned, the name can be selected as we want, but it's also recommended to use suitable names for the variables. The property column should be now rows, because we want to query the rows. And the type is now data row, not data column anymore. In this way I am querying the rows of the table. The data source is now of type 𝗖𝗔 of data row, and the range variable is of type data row. This means, I can use all methods and properties of data row type. If I am not using cast method, the type will be 𝗖𝗔 of object. In this way, I cannot work with the rows of the table as rows, but as objects, which makes the query more complex. Therefore it's also better to use cast method. Let's see the following query for example, where I am querying the rows of the table. It's to get only the rows, where the ID is equal to 5. The output will be of type 𝗖𝗔 of data row. This is the first way of how to query the rows of a data table. The second way to query rows of table is the following. Here I used only the DataTable variable as data source, without using rows property or cast method. What does it mean now and which type I have for the data source? Using from clause with a data table in this case will convert the source to this type, enumerable row collection of data row. This type implements the type 𝗖𝗔 of data row, which means that we can use the same methods here, what we can use for type 𝗖𝗔 of data row. This means, I can use all methods and properties of a data row type using the range variable. So, both ways are the same. The following statement with as enumerable method is also the same. The type here is also, enumerable row collection of data row. In summary, we can use all these three statements to query rows of a table. The types are different, but the functionality is the same. You may ask yourself, which way should I use to query the rows of a table, or which one is the best to use? Let's try to use both ways in UiPath, the first and the second one, so that you know what is the difference between using both, and which one is better to use. I have the following sequence, where I define a data table. In this assign activity I use the first statement to query the rows. Let's now try to use the variable row in where clause. As you see, I got recommendation for the methods and properties of a data row type, what I can use with this variable. For example the properties, item, item array, etc. Let's now try to use the other way of querying the rows. And now I will use the variable row in where clause. As you see, I don't get any recommendation for the methods or properties, what I can use with this variable. This doesn't mean that I cannot use the methods or the properties of the type data row. So, I can use these normally like any data row variable. But I have to know the methods and properties, and also how to use them. In summary, using the first way with rows property and cast method is better, because I have more information about the range variable, so that I can easily write the LINQ query. This is the only difference between both ways. As mentioned, I will talk in detail about cast method, how and when to use. That's all about querying a data table. Before moving to another data type, let me show you how to use more than one from clause in one query, to iterate different data sources. At the beginning of this video I mentioned, that each query expression must begin with from clause. And if we have subqueries, they also must begin with from clause. Let's see the following query, where I used from clause twice. The first one is to iterate the rows of the table. This is the main query. Inside this query there is a subquery, where I am iterating the columns of the table. As you see, I used the same statements, what I showed you before. In where clause I used both variables, row and col, to set the predicate to filter the table. This query is to filter the table and to get only the rows, where the ID is equal to 5. This is not a good query or a performant query, because I don't really need to iterate the rows and columns to filter the table. I can only iterate the rows to get the same result. This query is only to show you how to use more than from clause in one query. As mentioned, we can also use more than two from clauses in one query. The clauses must not be after each other. This means, I could have for example, from, where, and select clause. Or also any other clause between the different from clauses. This depends on our specific needs, what we wanted using the query. That's all about using from clause to query a data table. Let's move on to the next type, dictionary. I have for example the following variable of type dictionary, of string, object. I can write the statement as following. The data source is now of type, 𝗵 of key value pair of string, object. The range variable is of type, key value pair of string, object. So, we can use this variable with all methods and properties of this type, for example, with property key, to get the key of this pair, or with property value, to get the value of this pair. Let's see the following query. It's to query a dictionary and get only the key value pairs, where the key starts with letter C. Here I use the range variable with the property key to set the predicate. The output of this query is of type, 𝗵 of key value pair of string, object. This is how to use from clause to query a dictionary. Let's now see how to use from clause with an expression. For example, the following expression to get the files from a folder. This expression returns a string array, which contains the file paths of all files inside the folder. So, the type of the data source is now 𝗵 of string. It means, the range variable path is of type string, that represents the file path of each file inside the folder. Let's see another expression to get the files from a folder. The output of this expression is of type file_info array. The statement is the following. The data source in this case is of type 𝗵 of file_info, and the range variable is of type file_info. In this case I can use all methods and properties of file_info type with the range variable, for example this property, to get the last write time of the file, or this property to get the extension of the file. Let's see the following query for example, where I used last write time property. Here I used order clause, to sort the files in ascending order, depending on their last write time. This means, the output of this query will be of type 𝗵 of file_info, where I have all files from the folder, but they are sorted in ascending order. It means, the oldest file will be at the beginning, and the newest file will be at the end. You don't need to understand this query now. I just want to show you how to use from clause with an expression, and how to use the range variable to write a query. Let's now see how to use from clause to query the elements of an XML document. I have for example the following statement, where I am loading the XML file. The result will be stored in this variable, xdoc of type xDocument. Assume I have different elements inside the document. One of them is called customer, which appears more than once in the document. I want to query all customer elements inside the document. To do that I can use the following statement. Here I use the document variable with the method descendants. In brackets I added the name of the element, what I want to get, customer. This method returns all customer elements from the document. The data source in this case will be of type 𝗓𝗪𝗓 element. This means also, that the range variable is of type X element. Using this variable I can write the query, where I can use all methods and properties of an X element type. One of the properties of this type is attributes, which returns all attributes of the element. Assume I want to query the attributes of each customer element inside the document. This means, that I want to add a subquery to iterate the attributes of each customer element. I can do that using a second from clause in this way. The data source of this statement is of type 𝗓𝗪𝗓 attribute. And the range variable is of type X attribute. So, these statements are now to do the following. First, all customer elements of the document will be iterated. In each iteration of the elements, the attributes of the current element will be iterated. In this way, each customer with all attributes will be iterated. So, we can write a LINQ query using the elements and the attributes. This is how to use from clause to query the elements of an XML document, and also to query the attributes of an XML element. That's all you have to know about from clause. I showed you in this video, how to use the clause to query different data sources. In the next videos I will show you, how to use the other clauses. At the end I will show you complete queries, where I will use this clause and many other clauses in one query.